Hi there, I'm Michael Fudge, and in this video I'll demonstrate an end-to-end example of how to create a tip calculation program. The purpose of this program is to use Python's string library to handle a variety of use cases of inputs. When you think of a tip calculator, what you should be thinking of is you input the amount of your check, as you see on the screen, the tip percentage, and then you should output the amount you should tip. So that's sort of what we're thinking about. And what we're going to be using strings for is to handle a variety of different cases where the input might not quite match up with what the problem requires. In all of our end-to-end examples, I'm going to write my programs organically. I'm going to make mistakes, learn from those mistakes, and continue to revise and write my code, just like might happen in real life. The contents of this end-to-end example are based on Lesson 7, which covers strings. I'm going to do very little editing in this video, and that's by design. This example, of course, is in Jupyter Notebook, and you're welcome to code along with me. The completed source code for this example can be found on GitHub at this URL. If you're a student taking my course, then you have this code on your computer already as you've cloned the repository. So let's get started. So this particular program I'm going to write right now is pretty simple. It's not anything you haven't seen already in the course or in any of the video series we've seen before. It's a pretty linear program. I'm going to ask for someone to input the amount of the check, and I need that to be a float. Then I'm going to ask them to input a tip. And this is actually should be the tip percentage, right? Enter the percent you would like to tip. And then, of course, I need to do some calculations. Your tip is going to be your tip percentage times your check. And then let's print it out. Print. You should leave this amount for a tip. $% %.2f tip. We'll execute this program, turn line numbers on, we'll execute the program. How much is the check? $100. I want to tip 15%. And it says I should tip $1,500. Oops, that's a problem. So you see, I assumed that 15 like that means 15%, but in actuality, it meant 1,500%. So that's not right. Let's run it again. Now that I learned my lesson, I can do this correctly. And it says my tip is $15. That's great. There's going to also be people that are going to do is the following. They're going to run your program, and they're going to, what's the amount of the check? Oh, it's $500. And that causes an error because it cannot convert this string value to a float because of the $ in there. Somebody might also do this. They might put in $100 for the check, and then they would say, I want to tip 15% like that. And that also throws an error because you cannot convert the string value to a float. So there's a variety of issues that we have here, and we can use the string processing functions in Python to help us handle these kinds of problems. So before we get into actually solving the problem with the solution, let's talk about a strategy for what we want to do here. What I'd like to do is rather than have a function here called float, I would like to write my own function called currency. And it assumes that you're going to input money, and then it will convert it to a float, right? So if I entered this, I'm going to go down this bottom cell. If I enter this, it converts it to a float. If I enter this, it converts that to a float. Okay, so you get, or if I enter something like this, it converts that to a float. So I want to make something like that, and I also want to make another function here called percentage. And this function is going to work as follows. If I type in 15, it's going to assume that that's 15% as a float like that. If I type in 15%, it's going to drop the percent, assume it's a float like that. If I type in 0.15, it's just going to assume that it's a float like that. So there's a little bit of work I have to do on my end to write a function that will handle all these cases. But what I'm going to do is I'll use Python's string processing functions to help me do this. Okay. What I'd like to do is I'll keep this code up here, and I'm going to write the currency function. But first I'm going to kind of think through how something like this might work, right? So let's just go through it case by case. So let's suppose I enter in, let's say that my input is going to be this. What am I going to do? Well, I'm just going to say float that, right? And then I get my number. If my input is this, I can't just do float that, because when I do, I get a value error because of this $sign. So I'm going to use some string processing to get rid of the $sign. Okay. Now I'm not really sure what method I want to use with string, so I'm going to come down here and monkey around with the dir command, dir data. That's going to tell me all the things I can do to a string. And I've got some internal methods here, and I'm going to look, I've got center, case fold is lower. Here's replace. Replace might be useful. So let's see what replace can do. So I'm going to type in help data replace. And the replace function is built in, and it says replace the old with the new. Replaces old by new. So old and new are just arguments to replace. So let's try it out. Data replace. The old is a $sign, and the new is nothing. And when I do that, I get 400 without the $sign. Just to show you that how this might work in a more generic sense is, let's have Mike, and then I say replace the I with an X. I get MXK. So see, it replaced the I with the X. Let's suppose my name is Mississippi. Lots of I's in that. It replaces all the I's with the X's. So the bottom line here is you can't know every single Python function, but what you can do is learn how to find out what functions are available. You use dir for that, and then you put in the variable that you're looking to use, right? Or a Python object. And then after that, you get help on the particular method that you want. In this case, it was data replace. And that's how I kind of figured out what it was that I wanted to use, and then secondly, how to use it. All right, so now that I have that, I need to come up with a strategy for writing my function. And I'm going to keep my code up here and just write my function. I guess I'll write it right up here. I'll write it right in this area. Okay, so I need a function called currency, which returns an input currency string as a float. And I guess I'm going to get specific. So it should remove, so input is a string, and then it's going to output string converted to float. And specifically, let's think about how this is going to work. So let's go through and do my to-do list. So I'm going to take that input string, let's just call it text. I'm going to replace the $sign with empty string. Then I'm going to try to convert to a float. And if that works, I'm going to return the float number. If I get some kind of exception, I guess I could just let the exception happen, and then I can handle the exception in my main program, because at that point you have a bigger issue, like you didn't type in a $sign, you typed in something like this. Enter the amount. That's not going to work in any case. So I guess that's okay. So there's my to-do list. Pretty simple. So I'm going to write my function now. So def currency. And it takes as input some text. And the first thing I'm going to do is say the text equals, take the text and replace the $signs with an empty string. Then let's say value equals float text. Let's convert the text to a float and return the value. All right. So I defined it, and I can run this all I want. Great, right? But I need to know if it works. So I ran it. See, it ran right there. Let me see if it works. Let's try it here. Currency, $500. And it returns a float. See that? Or if I do $578, or $500.78, it returns that as a float. Or if I put a couple spaces in here, does it still work? It still does. Or if I put a negative value in there. Okay, that does not work. Maybe I need to get that minus sign closer, like that. Okay, and that does work. So maybe I want to try to handle the fact that, you know, somebody could put the, what if they put the minus here? Like if I put the minus there, does it work? It does work. And so it works if the minus is there, and it works if the minus is there. So you might decide that that's good enough, and you don't need to handle the fact that there's extra spaces in here like that. I could handle that by looking for the spaces and replacing those with an empty string. So I could say, and I can chain these functions together. I could say, take the text, find all the dollar signs and replace them with empty string, then replace the spaces with an empty string. I could do that. So let me rerun this function there, and then let me try this, and then now it works. See? So you can see this is how you progressively build a function. You're not going to write your function, then just assume it works. You have to try all the different possible cases and make sure you've sort of handled that. So now I have this cool function currency, and I can use it in it, you know, like just like I would do. I could say money, you know, salary is, instead of saying float input, enter your salary. Instead of doing that, I can say currency input, like that. And I can enter my salary, and I can say I make $50,000 a year. And then I should probably print it, print salary. Let's do that again. $50,000 a year. And it works. Now, one thing that will still blow this up, if I run this and I type in, I make $1 million a year, right? You can throw some commas in there. And that blows it up, right? Because I need to get rid of these commas. So I can do that. Let's go modify our function again. And I could do another line with, you know, text and replace the commas, but I'm just going to chain them together. I'm going to say replace the dollar signs with nothing, replace the space with nothing, replace the commas with nothing. I'm going to run that cell, all good. Then come down here and try it again. And then my salary, let's say it's $1 million. And it works. Pretty cool. Okay. So you see, you make this, when you make something like this, it's pretty useful, right? Because now when you ask someone for input, you don't have to worry about them, you know, typing in, you know, their preference for how they're going to type in money or whatever, right? They could just assume that they're going to put that number in any way they want, and you're going to be able to convert it to the float it needs to be. And we can be a little more graceful with the way we handle our inputs. Okay, so that's the first one. We did currency. Now we have to do the same thing for the percentage, and the role, the recipe we're going to follow here, the recipe is going to be exactly the same. So I'm going to do something like this. Function percentage, input a percentage as text, output it as a float. Input text string, output float percentage. Okay, and some logic in here. One thing's for sure is we need to remove spaces and the percent symbol, right, from text. Then I need to convert, I need to convert to float and return the converted number. All right, good enough. Let's try to define it. Def percentage, and we pass in some text, and then we say the text is whatever the text is right now. Replace the percentage with an empty string. Let's also replace any of the spaces with an empty string. Then let's take that value. It looks really similar to the currency one, does it not? That could just be coincidence. Okay, I ran it. Let's give it a shot here. Let's do this, percentage. And then let's type in 50%. And it comes back with 50, but it should come back like this, 0.5, because that's 50%, because it's out of 100, right? So, but also, if I typed in this, 0.5, without the percent, I want that to be, that's right? So I only want to divide it by 100 when the percent is present. Another way to look at this is, well, that's probably the smart way to do it. So let's do it that way. So I need to find a function that tells me if this is in text. So let's do it again. So let's make a string here so I can do some help here. Let's say x is a string, right? Okay. And then I can say dir x to get some help on it. And does one of these functions look useful to me? There's a find, maybe find. I just saw find. There's also index. So let's try find. So dir, let's do this help x find. Returns the lowest index of s in substring where sub is found. Okay. Return -1 on failure. So if it doesn't find it, it returns -1. Okay. Let's see if I can use this to my advantage. So before I replace it, what I want to do is I want to say if text find the percent. If you find the percent, and that's bigger than or equal to 0, which means you found it, then I want to remove it, and I want to take the value, convert it to a float. Then I want to take the value and divide it by 100. Why divide it by 100? Because you put a percent at the end, which means you typed in 15%, which should be 0.15. So I want to divide it by 100. Else, what am I going to do? I'm still going to do some finding and replacing. So some of this stuff I'm going to do, right? This is where it gets a little tricky, right? Because I don't want to repeat code if I don't have to. But I know I'm going to do this. If I have any spaces, replace them with empty. Take the value, convert it to a float, and then I'm not going to divide it by 100, and then I'm going to return it. Okay, so it's similar, but not similar. And if I want to simplify it a bit, I could put the float here. I could do this all in one step here. I can take the float, then divide it, and then that makes it a little simpler. So if you find a percent, remove it, then divide it by 100. If you don't find a percent, just remove all the spaces and float it and return it. Okay, let's see if this works. So that should still be 0.5. It is. This should be 0.5 as well. Ooh. Okay, I got an error here. Value reference before assignment. Oh, it says float value. This should be float text. I'm looking at the line number right here. And I have text, but I don't have value, and I can't do that. So this must be text. All right. There we go, 50%, right? So this makes sense. If I enter, the coach always said, give 110%, which I don't really know how that's possible, but this should be 1.1, and it is. And that's much different than me entering in 0.110%, right, which is really small, right? When I say 0.1, I assume that that's already a percent, right? And it is. Okay. So now we've got our percentage function, and we've got our currency function, and we have our main program. So usually these functions go above the code that you're going to run. If I'm going to put this all in one program, what I would do is I'll take this, and let's cut it. And then I've got my functions, right? Function 1, function 2, and then here's my code, my program, my problem-solving program that uses my currency and percentages. And let's give it a shot and see if it works. Turn line numbers on in case I have an error. Let's run it. Enter the amount of the check. The amount of the check is $15. I'm going to enter it that $15.95. Ooh, it didn't throw an error. Let's see how it works. I want to tip, I need to keep the math simple, so 10%. I know that's a cheapskate tip, but let's just go with it. $1.59, right? That worked out well because that's 10%, right? Let me try it again with some solid math so that we don't have to do so much of the math in our heads. Let's post a $20 check. And I want to tip 25%. 25% of a $20 check is $5, and there it is. So there you have it. Okay, hopefully you learned a lot. We'll see you again next time. Thank you. Bye now.